Hey everybody, how's it going? So, I thought I'd make an early insight RTA tier list. This is what I currently think of characters in the meta. Keep in mind, everyone has different preferences, and every tier list you see from people are going to be slightly different, but I think most of the things are going to be similar, especially around the top tiers. Most characters will be the same. Now let me just break down the tiers really quickly and what they mean. So I say amazing, great, decent, usable, super niche, worthless, and unknown. So the reason I have unknown is these are characters that are either getting buffed in a way that'll completely change how they work, or they might actually become usable. She's going to be getting a specialty change, and she is not out yet, although she'll be coming out very, very soon. But I would project that she's probably going to be fairly low tier unless something strange happens with her and people find some crazy use. I'll be trying her out when she first comes out, though. So, the amazing tier, these are characters that I would say are picked in almost every single match of RTA. The meta kind of revolves around these characters. They're ones that you really have to watch out for when you're drafting. You have to expect your opponent to be picking them. The great tier is similar to amazing, but I'd say to a lower extent. These are characters that might not fit as well into the meta sometimes, or are picked more in response to certain characters. So for instance, Ran as an example, because right now cleave and aggro are a lot weaker than they normally are, and most people are playing standard, slower play, so some of these characters are not as popular or as powerful as they usually are during a normal meta. Decent, these are characters that are pretty damn solid and they're good, but you're not going to be picking them every match, and you're definitely picking them more in a certain playstyle or in response to certain units. But they are still solid characters. Saying decent does not at all mean that they're bad. Honestly, being decent is a pretty high praise in Epic 7 right now, because being usable, as in this tier, means at least you work, right? Usable, these are characters that you'll see from time to time. Sometimes they can be a really good pick in certain scenarios, but you're not going to be using them super often. Now, keep in mind, some players might be swearing by certain characters that they want to pick every single match they pick some of these, but that's only going to be a very specific player. Super niche, these are characters that I think are viable as characters in RTA, but just aren't very good, at least not in the current meta. Some people like to use some of them. I see some of them crop up from time to time, but they're usually characters you can see once in a blue moon, very, very rarely. But hey, maybe you have a playstyle that picks something like Charlotte or Closer Charles every game, but that's your personal preference, right? And then worthless, it might be a little bit mean to say worthless, but these are characters that I just do not think that are really worthwhile building for RTA. I just really don't find it worth it at all. Now, some of these characters you might see every once in a while, very rarely. Like, for instance, I have a character like Top Model Luca here who I built and I use her every once in a while, but nobody else is really using this character, and these are characters you just don't really need to build for RTA and aren't especially worth it. So let's just quickly go through this. So, ML Landy, one of the best characters in the entire game. This character is pretty much dominating the entire meta. Really, really big pick. Same with Euphine. She's a very similar character to ML Landy. These are in no particular order of who's the best or who's the worst in each tier, by the way. But these are just counter characters that are tank down, really, really powerful. You see them all the time. Briar Witch Asaria and Angel of Light kind of go hand in hand as well, and just so powerful, being able to strip people's buffs and disable them. But Briar Witch Asaria is almost permabanned by people. In fact, both these characters are kind of permabanned by tank down players at the moment, because people can't deal with all the buff strip, especially when they're spamming characters like Arrowell all the time, or Last Rider Crow. Briar Witch Asaria, though, can be used a lot better in aggro. Conqueror Lilius, Lua, and Knockwall, I would put all in a similar boat. But what's funny is Conqueror Lilius, a lot of us, including me, were thinking that Conqueror Lilius isn't going to be that good anymore with Moon Bunny. Well, we're wrong. People still just spam pick Emola's first pick every single game, and then pick something like Solitaria and other stuff to counteract whatever you're picking to counter her. So you still see her all the time. In fact, she is picked way more than characters like Lua right now. People really like the extra aggression. She's also picked a lot more than Knockwall. But essentially, Conqueror Lilius is still running the meta. She's still in all of these games. As for Lua and Knockwall, they're similar but different, but they're both incredibly strong. I would actually say I see more Knockwall than Lua, really, at the moment, which is kind of funny, because Lua's not especially good against some of these characters like Spectre Tenebria, Aiden, Navy Captain Landy, so you don't really see her as much, while Knockwall is a lot better versus some of those units. But both of them are still really, really great characters. I personally use Knockwall a ton. Zio, so here's the thing. He's not the best in the current meta because people aren't playing aggro cleave as much, but he's still such a powerful unit. I honestly can't put him any lower than amazing tier. I really just don't think that he deserves to be any lower. Unbound Knight Airwell, I would say undisputed best tank in the entire game. Just so much mitigation, and for the tank down slow playstyle, just so important and powerful right now in the game. Last Jar Crowd, to a lesser extent, I would say, is kind of just the second best tank in the entire game, and he is really good. And he just adds so much aggression, and he's also able to put up immunity, which can be really useful versus certain teams. But I would say Airwell is kind of a cut above him, but I don't think it's okay to put Last Jar Crowd in a lower tier, since they're essentially the two best tanks in the game. Karina, well, I guess you could call her a tank in a way too. Definitely one of the strongest anti-aggro, anti-cleave characters, but also just in the current meta with how people are playing, especially with characters like Landy and ML5 and stuff running all over the place, and Aiden. She's good against all of them, which is a really big deal. And she's just a safe, super safe character. And her artifact doing so much extra damage makes it so you're actually able to fight characters like Landy with that aftermath damage, not caring about crits. Spectre Tenebria, still one of the best DPS in the entire game. The reason you see so much less of her is because of Navy Captain Landy and Abyssal Euphane. They're the main characters that are holding her down. Otherwise, you'd see her a ton more because she's not very good against them. That said, she's still one of the staple DPS in Epic 7 and still very, very strong. Depending on your pre-bans, you might see a lot more or less of her. Aiden. This character is in, I believe, half of all games of RTA. I believe she's the most picked unit in the game right now. People love spam picking her because she protects characters like Abyssal Euphane. Essentially, they just pick her with other characters that protect each other's weaknesses, and then it becomes really frustrating. She's super RNG, though, so she high rolls or low rolls, and it goes all over the place, right? The character is an amazing tier. These are the ones that I see every game. Like, you're not going to see literally every single one of these characters every game. They're the ones that essentially I see probably, like, both players pick 2 or 3 of them minimum every single game most of the time. And they kind of run the game. Now, the characters in great tier, I see them a lot, and I think they're very strong, but I don't see them as much as these amazing tier characters at all, and some of them are a little more specific, which I'll get into. So first we have Mediator Querix. So this is the first time I've ever not put him in the very top tier. The reason is, I think that he's kind of difficult to use. I think cleansers are really hard to use right now. There's resets from characters like Lua and Knockwall, or someone can play aggressive and completely counteract him. He's not very good versus Brarwitchasaria either. So he's kind of running into a lot of problems. Is he the best cleanser ever in theory? Yeah, pretty much, but cleanse is really difficult to do right now, and I don't see him a whole lot compared to before. Blind is one of the highest win rates in the entire game, but that's mainly because she's only picked when the opponent has Spectre Tenebria most of the time, and she is really good at that. Just a solid staple anti-Spectre Tenebria unit, but sometimes just obviously really good at anti-cleave or anti-aggro. Ambitious Tywin, so this character, he's definitely one of the best tanks in the game. When your opponent doesn't have a source of immunity or something like that, he can be a real threat, and I think he's actually going to become even stronger with the buffs that they're giving Death to Array and Sleep in general. I think we might see more Ambitious Tyrant being picked with these AoE strips to combo into him as well. But he's just a really good anti-debuff character too. If you're getting debuffed like every once in a while, or like pelted with AoE debuffs, he's able to cleanse some. Destina, one of the best cleansers in the entire game. She's insanely good at being able to heal and cleanse at the same time and just secure your team when you take a ton of damage at once. The problem is that debuffs are so powerful and effectiveness is so strong that people have actually had to lower her F-res to opt for more tankiness most of the time, because they found that having like 270 F-res is not enough to resist some of these characters. But she still is like top of her class at being able to heal and just support your team against these debuffers. That said though, you're gonna see a little less of her than before because sometimes she just gets abused, especially against characters like Brarwitchasaria. I have Angelica's able to silence my Destina even when she has 260 F-res. It can become really difficult, especially with Soulburn ignore F-res units like Knockwall running around, or Lua too. Next, we have Ran. Normally I have Ran in amazing tier. I just think Cleave Aggro is a little in a rougher spot, so you're not really going to see as much of him, and he's not quite as strong as normal, even though he is such an awesome character and so powerful, right? Just at the moment, I think he should be a little bit lower. Ocean Breeze Lilica, I would say one of the other best solvers in the game, along with Destina. She's a more anti-aggression one, and while she's so great, a lot of the people actually have Conquer Lilius with so much effectiveness that she can't even resist the debuffs, which is kind of a huge problem when you're running around with like 260 F-res and the Lilius just provokes you anyways and then you lose the game. That's a huge problem. Or a lot of the time people just ban her and then, well, you don't have the cleanser because you can't really pick 2 cleansers most of the time. So you run into some issues there, but she is a really, really good cleanser overall still. Jacko, you don't see as much of her because less cleave and aggro as per usual. I'll be saying this a lot, by the way. But she still is one of the best aggressive characters for people trying to cleave you. Her damage is insane. She combos with all these debuffers like Zeo and Ran, etc. And she's so powerful at it that I think she still deserves to be so high up. Next, we have Lionheart Surmia. She has become a pretty staple pick in RTA. Now, she is so good versus counterattacks and just ramping up the aggression with a huge AoE damage ability. But the problem is that she's not actually that good into Navy Captain Landy, which is the most picked counterattack character at the moment, her and Aiden. So her missing the crits constantly is just feeding the Aiden, or feeding the Landy, and so usually it just means Landy gets more damage on your team and is able to AoE faster, so you kind of need support with Lionheart Survey to fight stuff like that, but she is still so good versus some of these counterattack characters, and just a solid character at making it so that your opponent has to really worry about their tankiness because she hits so hard in AoE. Galome Crescent Bologna. So she's about to get a buff, but even before her buff, I think she's a pretty solid character if you have a good tank down strategy. The problem is she's really bad versus characters like Aiden, so she really runs into those issues, or some really aggressive teams she also has problems with, or hard debuffs. So you have to support her really well to actually be able to utilize her. I think her buffs are going to make her way better at consistently killing characters like ML Landy, and I think we might see a little bit more of her. I also think that you could even, if you want to go really crazy, build a super aggressive one that is just speed damage and their whole point is just to kill Landy. I think that's actually plausible, but I think we're going to be seeing a little bit more of her. But I also think that some characters hold her down, which really makes her more difficult to use. Even with her buffs, she's becoming better at what she does already, but she's not really gaining any new usage. Martial Artist Ken. Now, I really never thought I would put him this high, but he is really darn good right now. He's really good at dealing with ML Landy and Abyssal Euphane. Obviously, he has some weaknesses. He's not great versus teams that have immunity, because he really needs to provoke these units to force them to attack into him. So he can have some problems there. He also is really, really hard to build, but when he's built well, or just picked in the right positions, he can solo entire teams. He just pops off so hard, but he has weaknesses, of course, such as Spectre Tenebria and Savior Aiden, but overall, he's just really, really good to have right now. Midnight Gala Lilius. So this character is definitely one of the best aggressive damage dealers. She's able to one-shot basically any tank in the game that has enough health, unless, of course, it's something like Arrowell. That character is impossible to one-shot even with her. But if you have something like Vigor with ML Lilius, she still will kill. I think that if you pick Last Strike Crow, you always become vulnerable to her, and anyone who picks ML Lilius against you is always thinking about picking this unit. They're always considering it after looking at your team. And I think she's a really, really good aggressive unit. Solitaria, she's able to deal with focus units, which is really nice, and she also can just completely control matches. Just one-man army, essentially, where she's able to just lock down your whole team with debuffs. If your team doesn't have enough cleanses or units that don't care about debuffs, like Landy and Euphane, then she can completely run you over single-handedly, and you'll just feel completely helpless. So you have to be really careful about characters like this. Moon Bunny, so she is really great versus these extra turn characters such as ML Lilius, Knockwall, even Lua maybe a little bit to some extent when you pick her with other units. Some people pick Moon Bunny plus Lilius, like Fire Lilius, as a combo to make it so that characters like Lua can't really do anything, but then if they ban one of them, you could run into trouble. So there's problems with picking a character like Moon Bunny, but she is a really good aggressive unit and anti-extra turn character, which tons of people forget that characters like Solitaria Soulburn is extra turn, or Spectre Tenebria Soulburn, or Lionheart, so sometimes she can pop off in hidden ways people don't expect. So I think she's really great overall for that, but she does have some weaknesses where sometimes you pick her and you realize, wow, even though she's useful, ML Lilius is just that OP. So, Shadow Knight Pilot. So this is a bit of a weird one. This is more me looking at what the community is thinking than myself personally. Well, I've seen a lot of usage of her on streams as well. She seems to be an up-and-comer at standard play right now. People picking her versus characters like Emma Landy all the time. And essentially they put Rocket Punch on her and make her a DPS that's also supporting the team with making it so you take less damage from counterattacks and extra attacks. And she's also able to defense buff the team. And then she does a lot of damage to some of these characters that have, like, you know, anti-crit. She's also able to deal with Aiden, which is really strong because the two most picked, I would say the three most picked standard units right now are Aiden, Emma Landy, and Abyssal Euphane. And she's pretty good against Emma Landy and Aiden. I don't know about Euphane though. Well, she's decent against Euphane because you take less damage from the counterattacks, which is nice. But all in all, she seems to be an up-and-comer that is gaining a lot of popularity and everyone's kind of spamming her. I don't know if we'll see her as time goes on, but she's really strong at the moment. Decent. So these are characters that I've been seeing an okay amount. It's usually stuff that you round off the team. So I would say amazing and great tiers are the ones where you see the first 3 picks in most people's drafts contain them, kind of the core of their teams. While the characters in the other 3 tiers, these are characters that you see normally picked in the final 2 picks, usually to round off the draft to specifically counter what your opponent picked. So I'll just quickly go through these ones a little faster than the previous. Edward, obviously really good anti-debuffer, really good at dealing with all these like fat debuff units that are constantly pelting you, such as Solitari, other stuff like that. But sometimes he just gets overwhelmed and dies, which is really stupid. I do think that he should be able to cleanse a little bit easier or something. But a lot of the time you'll pick him and actually get disappointed. Apocalypse Ravi, she moved down really hard. She's really bad in the meta because she's bad versus shield. She's bad versus anti-crit. She's bad versus control. She's bad versus Aiden, the Spectre Tenebria. She's bad versus injury. These are all things that are just so easily pickable. She's kind of bad versus most of the meta right now, and you have to pick her at the end of the draft. Architecta, Leica, and Strays, I'll put them together. They're cleave or aggro units mainly, which is much weaker. But you just don't really see them that often because they're bad versus characters like Navy Captain Landy because of the RNG from anti-crit and stuff like that. And it's just really hard to draft them at the moment. I would say Architect Leica is even harder to draft because characters like Abyssal Euphane make it so that she can't S2 into S3, which is even worse. And Strays is especially bad into Landy because he has only a 50% chance of being able to kill that tank, which is a big problem. So you don't see them as much except in the end of draft. Same with Arya, she's an end of draft powerhouse where like if your opponent's team is weak against her, then essentially they have to ban her or they're going to lose because she's just going to solo them, just protecting the whole team and causing so many counters. Bihu, he's actually really good versus characters like Briar Tesseri. Is actually pretty good versus Navy Captain Landy, Savior Aiden, which is really, really nice. He's able to strip the buffs off of characters like Arrowwell and Last Rider Crow, which is also a really big benefit. And able to fight some of these important units, I think actually lands him a place in decent at the very least. Shu, you don't really see her as much, but she still is just a solid neutral DPS, even though she's not as popular as she once was. But you're not really going to see her a ton compared to before. Elena, she gained popularity, I would say, against characters like Knockwall, or just some of these AoE that became more popular. Her being able to cleanse the team so easily and then turn invulnerable is really good against some of the aggressive teams you'll see from time to time. Elagos, I think he's really good at killing Aiden and his soul burn, being able to defense break, and then his briefcase killing a priority target such as Aiden or Spectre Tenebria. I think is really, really good, and I actually really like that about him. But he is only really used in cleave. Lethe, able to kill some of these units such as Aiden, Navy Captain Landy, Abyssal Euphane, Lionheart, ML Ken. Definitely lands her a place in at least decent tier. She does have some strong weaknesses such as injury or just hard debuffs, and she's really having a hard time against that stuff. And sometimes you're just so tanky that she can't kill you, but she is still a pretty solid unit. Lilius is mainly used against Lua. You don't really see much else of her, to be honest, but if you look at the Chinese Championship Cup, she's picked in almost every single game and considered kind of the main tank, which I found really interesting, actually. Maid Chloe, so you don't see as much of her in the current meta, even though it's slow meta, just because Ephra's is not the best stat at the moment, and people are too busy spamming counterattack stuff to really use as much Maid Chloe, but she's still a solid cleanser and attack buffer. Milim, she's decent in some aggressive teams, but otherwise you're not really going to see her as much, but I just think she's a solid DPS in general. Peyra, I think that overall Peyra has a lot of weaknesses compared to before, so you're picking her later in the draft, but sometimes she really rounds off the draft and can hard counter some of these popular units, such as, let's say, Karina, or Unbound Knight Arrowell, or Conqueror Lilius, or Briarwitch Asaria, which I think is really, really good. Fire Captain Flam, it's just good to round off the draft when your opponent doesn't have much cleanse. She can just solo the entire team sometimes with debuffs, but not very good versus these cleansey or unstunnable characters. Politis. You don't really see as much of her anymore. Sometimes Degen Politis can be useful. Sometimes you'll see a DPS Politis in some cleave teams, but overall she's usually just used to counteract characters like Ahmed or some of these other CR pushing units, sometimes in conjunction with Yufine. The thing is, Yufine is kind of just better than Politis overall at the moment, so you're not going to see as much of her, but I think she's important. Just having that passive stops other units from being as strong. Remnant Violet, always a great way to round off the draft. He's able to fight characters like Navy Captain Landy and Yufine, so I think he instantly is pretty solid as a character overall, right? Raymaru, able to deal with some of these aggressive units, or decent versus Midnight Gala Lilius aggressive teams, especially because he's able to steal the damage limit buff, which means you can't really die, which is really awesome. Also able to sometimes fight against some of these Landy teams, being able to defense break the team and also just do a ton of flat damage. Sagebone Sazan, one of the best anti-cleave characters from antiquity, really old character at this point, but he's still decent. He's still like a decent anti-cleave, anti-aggro character to round your draft off with. So is Senya, mainly used for those, but sometimes she's also able to fight some characters such as Navy Captain Landy, but she does need a lot of support to be able to do that. Shuna, so she is actually indirectly getting a buff because sleep is about to be buffed, so I think someone like Savior Aiden is going to really have to watch out for someone like Shuna, because she's actually going to be able to make it so that Aiden cannot dodge while asleep. So she could even move up possibly, because she is a solid Soul Weaver, being able to cleanse and be able to debuff the opponent's team. Summertime Asaria, she's actually a pretty solid cleave aggro unit when used correctly. Her bombs also just do so much damage to characters like Navy Captain Landy, Savior Aiden, so she's actually really, really solid. Even can stun characters like Karina, which is so awesome, so that she can't activate. Sharon, you don't see as much of her right now. I think she's a decent unit still, because she is a good control-y injury unit, and also to keep characters like Mediator Quirk in check, but she's not as popular as she once was. Urban Shadow Shu is the best injury character in the game, but all she does is injury, essentially. I think she's still solid. Also being a dark unit, having a higher chance to hit Landy has actually won me some games, but she's just a solid anti-health scaling unit, and for health scalers they really have to watch out, which is part of the reason why you see less health scalers too, is because characters like this. That's why you see less Yolha as well. Every time I picked her, my opponent picks something like this usually. But Yolha still is a solid tank, being able to kill some of these units like Savior Aiden, or help kill Navy Captain Landy, let's say, or Abyssal Yufine. I think it's really important that a tank is actually able to do that. Well, Zahhak, my chat tells me to pick this character approximately every single match of every single day. While he is theoretically really good versus Aiden, some people have become so tanky with their Aiden Arrowell combos that he's actually not able to kill. Also, he has to take an extra turn, which can be a big problem against Moon Bunny, because without the attack buff, he usually can't kill. But he's still like a solid unit to have built. I think it's worthwhile having a Zahhak most of the time. Assassin Cartouche, I bet most people don't expect this. So, I think Garfield here is actually really good versus Cleave. He actually, for a while, had the highest win rate in the game in Emperor to Legend games, because people would be playing Cleave, and if you picked a solid team and then Assassin Cartouche at the end, the odds were so high for your opponent to lose, because something would go wrong. They'd get counterattacked at a bad time, or they would miss an important attack. Essentially, he just makes it so that the odds of your opponent getting everything going right for them are so low that you would win. And I've actually been using him sometimes as a late pick, and my opponent always bans him. They're terrified, and I would be too. Sid, one of the best Cleave units in the game still. You just don't see as much Cleave right now, which is why I don't have him as high of a tier, even though he is still such a god unit when you're playing that playstyle. Just really good overall. Chrono Kawazu, he's actually able to kill characters like Navy Captain Landy, which is really, really important. Able to keep them a little more in check. He can also deal with Lionheart Surmia, even Martial Artist Ken, stuff like that. So I think that he definitely is a really solid character. It's just really hard to get enough damage for him to always be killing. Now we go into usable. I'll be even more brief with these units. You just don't really see a lot of these characters very often. I'm only going to talk about specific ones, I would say. Like Abigail, like you don't really see her too much, but she can be used for certain anti-cleave. Crimson Armand, she's an alright tank when Arrowell isn't available. Ahmed, she's really hard to pick, especially with Euphine and Politis, but dedicated Ahmed pickers can actually usually pull her off to a decent extent. Arunka is used versus some of these Arrowell teams to try and kill Aiden, although sometimes she just misses the mark and doesn't do enough damage, which is a huge problem because then you lose. Minamoto Laika, she is a really fast guiding light character that can sometimes stop some of these characters such as Lua or Conqueror Lilius when they don't have immunity. Desert Jewel Basari, you don't see him as much, but he was always a consistent anti-Arrowell, anti-Meteor Quirk, just anti-shield unit in general. Designer Lilibet, good versus some aggro cleave aggression debuffers, but not as good in the current meta right now because a lot of the characters don't really proc her at the right times anymore. Dark Corvus, he can be picked at the very end sometimes to deal with some of these teams with, let's say, Navy Captain Landy or stuff, or just constant counterattacks or AoEs. Whoops. Amelia, she's an alright cleanser or aggressive unit when paired with certain other units, but not used a ton. Fairy Tail Tenebra is very good versus Angel of Light teams, but you're not really going to see her used too much else. Most of the time you would rather pick Angel of Light than her, but she's able to deal with some of them decently. Faithless Litica, you don't see her as much because the way that a lot of people play right now, she's just not really contributing enough with her reset. Even if you reset a character like Euphine, they're still counterattacking you so much, so sometimes she's just not able to do enough for your team against some of the main and more popular DPS. While Cecilia, I see her from time to time as a tank that people want to pick. Often when Arrowell's not up, she's still a decent option at bulking up your team. Little Queen Charlotte, she is able to actually kill someone like Abyssal Euphane, which is really strong, especially when used with characters like Amelia or some sort of buffer like that. I think she can actually work really well sometimes. Wrecker and Rowana, you don't really see her as much right now, but she was really good in Cleave before this meta, where you would pair her with Zio, Peyra, Ran, some combo like that, and she would pop off. But now everyone has immunity on their characters, and Euphane makes it so that she never takes a turn. So that's huge problems for Rowana. You could even move her down, to be honest. Regular Rowana, she is theoretically sometimes really good versus these counterattack teams, but often, even if you are pushing up your team and healing against Landy and Euphine, when they get their S3, they can just kill you. So sometimes Rowana's not really contributing as much as you may think that she would. Roy, he's really hard to use, but sometimes I've seen places where you could really use him at the end of the draft as a main DPS. Subray Charlotte was good in some Cleave or some anti-Landy stuff, sometimes where you would get the defense breaks because she's uncounterable as well, which was really nice, but you don't see her a ton right now. Twisted Eidolon Kairon, I think he can be really good in some slow matches, but the problem is he's very weak versus some of those meta stuff at the moment. Like, he's not good versus like Knock Wall, he's not very good versus Abyssal Euphane, so he definitely has some problems right now. Even though he has potential, this might not be, ironically, the meta for him, even though it's such a slow meta. Winter, I think that she's decent versus all the MO Lilius picks you see constantly. She's okay versus Lionheart Surmia. She's able to deal with Midnight Gala Lilius. I think that gives her some merit, even though she's not the best. Bloodblade Karin, she was good for Cleave or some anti-Cleaves. I see some Cleave players pick her all the time, and she's really popular with them, but she's a little more niche right now. Last Piece Karin, she's really good anti-Aiden, but the problem is she takes an extra turn like Zahawk, so Moon Bunny can stop them. Also, she's not normally the fastest unit ever, so units can outspeed her, so she has some weakness there. But she's still an alright unit, but she doesn't have as much utility as Zahawk, so I have her lower. Commander Pavel, he can be somewhat pretty good in some of these Cleave teams, sometimes really good at rounding off the draft near the end, and sometimes a force ban because he adds so much damage. But he does have some problems versus some of the most meta characters, like he doesn't push up enough against Euphane, or it doesn't crit enough versus Landy, etc. Regular Landy, she really fell in hard times. Every once in a while I see her as a great pick, but normally only a good pick when people are pre-banning characters like Landy, because she's normally better versus characters such as Spectre Tenebria, or maybe used more in a more aggressive team. Some people have the speed damage Landys that they use with Conquer Lows, but just not used a ton anymore. super niche. These are characters that I don't even think I would especially talk about, most of them. I don't think I'm really going to talk about any. There's not really any I would especially mention, but these are characters I see from time to time, but they're not really staple picks at all. You might have one or two that you use every once in a while, but you're probably not using a lot of them. They might be a good niche pick near the end of your draft where the opponent's team is kind of weak to them, but you're not really going to see them picked otherwise. Like, there's not enough cleave for characters like Kayron to be picked all the time, and even some cleave teams are able to just completely wreck him anyways, so that's just one example. Like, I recently fought a Rem. Characters like Sylvan Sage Vivian are just so difficult to use at the moment. You don't really see many speed imprints like Vildred because people aren't really speed racing against each other. Normally one person will go fast, the other person goes, okay, I'll just go slow, and then you don't really see a lot of that. Every once in a while, you'll see someone like Tierlist versus a cleave team. I've seen some Infinite Prize into Katie's, but she's always done very poorly. So essentially, these are characters that either just have a more poor performance on average, or you just don't really see them a whole ton anymore. And then the characters in Worthless, I don't think these are really worthwhile talking about. You might see a couple every once in a while. You'll see someone do like a Cleave Ludwig play or something. But you're not really going to see these characters on average. It's really, really rare. Sorry if this offends you, because you're like, oh, X or Y unit. Oh, Tayu's my favorite unit ever. But I just don't think these are very good characters right now. And then we already went over the unknown tier. So anyways, this is pretty much my tier list at the moment. You know, this is just my opinion, and some people are going to disagree with some of the placements. I would say most of the time, me and other creators usually have like the highest tiers. We like kind of agree with each other, and then as you move down, it starts to become a little more ambiguous and more opinionated as you go further and further. But for the most part, I think I tried to cover it. I'm trying to cover multiple playstyles because I've played aggressive this meta, I've played slow this meta, and I've fought people doing both too. So I've kind of tried to factor all that in when I made this list. But yeah, that pretty much covers it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I hope to see you next time.